Hello students, today's class is on plant taxonomy. I know many of you must be worried, oh my god, scientific names. But it's not that tough. Let's look at plant taxonomy from a different perspective today. Suppose I give you some shapes and I give many of these shapes and I ask you to group them. So what you'll do? All such circular shapes you'll put in one group. Such shapes with all sides equal you'll put in one group. Another shape which has three sides you'll put in one group. And then you'll put a name to the shapes in this group as circles, as squares, as triangles. So what you have done? You have classified these shapes according to their character. And then you have put a name to it. So that next time you come across these shapes, you do not need to describe them, that I am looking for an object which is circular, which has no edge. You straight away say I am looking for an object, or I am looking for a circle, I am looking for a square, or I want a triangle. So what you have done is you have described, you have classified, and you have named it for future use. So in plant world, you'll see that there are different kinds of plants all around you. So plants which are woody, tall in structure, we call them trees. They also have different types again. Plants which are soft stem, they are annual or biennial, seasonal. Those plants we call herbs. And again there are plants which are non-woody, but they are perennial. They survive for more than one season, and we call them shrubs. So we need to put a name to each of these plants, to the type of plants, to the name. Each of them has to be named. Why? So that we can easily identify them next time. For example, looking at this plant itself, you'll say this is a pumpkin. How do you know that? You identify it from your past knowledge that it has a orange fruit, it is a climber or a creeper, and you know the taste of the fruit. So like you know a pea plant from the pods, from its states, from its tendrils. Likewise, you have given some attribute to each plant, and from your knowledge, past knowledge, you know the name. But if we need to know more about it, if you are in botany, you need to know its scientific name. You need to know to which category it belongs to. So in today's class, we'll see what is plant taxonomy and why we need to know plant taxonomy. So we will see why we need to classify plants in different groups. What is the importance of plant classification? What are the tools of taxonomy? How do we classify? What is the structure of taxonomy? How does the classification looks like? What is the history of angiosperm taxonomy? How did it start? And what are the different types of classification? Is there one or more types of classification? And who are the taxonomists who are involved in this process? So if I say why classification, it's very easy to understand. There are thousands and thousands of plants. So we'll be so confused when we want to identify one single plant. So we need a thumb rule. We need a tool to identify that plant. And why we need to identify? The first and foremost is for our own use. But also, there are many plants which are threatened, which we need to conserve. There are thousands of plants which are used in our medicines, traditional as well as modern. We need to know them specifically and we need to conserve them. Also, 12 domesticated plant species actually constitute about 30,000 species of all the plants that we eat are edible. So in a nutshell, we can say we need to know our plants, we need to identify them, because we need to know their roles in the ecosystem so that we can conserve them. We can conserve the biodiversity around us. We can properly manage them for human welfare, as well as for some scientific studies, which can give us new drugs, new food material. For example, if I were to discover a drug from, say, the plant Calotropis procera, I know that it has some medicinal properties. Now, if I do not know the plant, if I cannot exactly identify it, and I go and do my research on another plant, say Crotalaria pallida, then my whole time, money is wasted and the outcome will be very dangerous. Hence, it's very important that plant taxonomy, the tool, it helps us in arranging the elements of the plants into a more systematic manner so that the plants are better understood and they can be easily identified and used in future. And while doing so, plant taxonomy creates a database of knowledge on plants. And in doing so, it also follows a thumb rule that the most primitive plants, they starts with most primitive plants and moves towards the most advanced plants. So in that process, it also takes into note the ancestors of the plants, both living as well as fossil. And in doing so, overall, it indicates the distribution of plants, where they are found, which area, which type of habitats they grow on this planet, so that they can be used for human welfare. So in a nutshell, taxonomy is the science of describing, classifying and naming plants. You have already actually done it with the shapes. So it's not only of plants, it's also of microorganisms and animals too. How does it do it? It uses morphological, behavioral, genetic and biochemical observations to identify, describe and arrange species into a system of classification. And how does this looks like? The system looks this way. It will have this kind of levels in which plants will be arranged. All plants will come under the kingdom plant. It is the kingdom Plantae. Then there will be division, class, order, family, genus, species and also variety. And each of these levels will be called a taxon or unit of taxonomy. For example, if you look at Carica papaya, you all know papaya. So it belongs to the kingdom Plantae, division Magnoliophyta, class Magnoliopsida, order Brassicales, family Caricaceae, genus Carica and of course species papaya. So if you look at the history of angiosperm classification, we have seen that there are three types of classification. Number one, natural, which is based on one or few characters of plants, mostly consistent characters, constant characters which are heritable, which go into the next generation. For example, the flower, reproductive parts of flower, androecium and gynoecium. Then we have the natural system. It takes into consideration a large number of characters, morphological, cytological, anatomical, phytochemical, etc. And then we have the phylogenetic system of classification, which is based on the evolutionary sequence or the genetic relationships among different groups of plants. So as we go, let's look at who were the taxonomists who were most involved in these processes. So if you look at artificial classification, it started with the father of botany, Theophrastus. He was the one who initiated a system of classification of all the available plants. Then it was followed up by Linnaeus, who is also called the father of taxonomy. After artificial classification came natural classification, where we need to mention Bentham and Hooker, whose system of classification is followed worldwide even today. And more advanced or recent is the phylogenetic system of classification, where it's worth mentioning Hutchinson, Takhtajan, Conquest is also there. And more recently we have a group of taxonomists who have come together called the APG or Angiosperm Phylogeny Group, who work on molecular systems of the plants and create a classification. In artificial classification, as I told you, Linnaeus has published his work in Species Plantarum in 1753, and he based it on the sexual parts of the flowers only. For example, androecium, if it was one, he called the group Monandria, 2 Diandria, and so on and so forth. And he also gave the binomial nomenclature, which is a landmark introduction in plant taxonomy. So what is binomial nomenclature? Linnaeus suggested that every scientific name will have only two parts, not a polynomial but a binomial, where the first part is called the generic epithet and the second part is called the specific epithet. The generic epithet will start with a capital letter and the specific epithet will start with a small letter. Many of you have already studied this, I think, in your schools also. What is more interesting, here we have Mangifera indica, which is mango, as you all know, it cannot be spelled as Mangifera mangifera. That means the generic epithet cannot follow, or the specific epithet cannot follow the generic epithet. In plant taxonomy, this is called tautonym and it is not allowed. Instead, in plant taxonomy, what we do is we always have a different generic epithet and a different specific epithet. But in animal taxonomy, this is allowed. Tautonyms are allowed. So here I have Ciconia ciconia, which is a white stork, with generic and specific epithet are same. So this is the basic difference between plant and animal taxonomy. If we come to natural classification, as I told you, Bentham and Hooker's name finds a special reference here because they published their work in Genera Plantarum in 1862 to 1883, and it is the most widely accepted system of classification so far. Most schools, colleges still use this system of classification. Even the herbarias all around the world where plant samples are kept, they also follow Bentham and Hooker's system of classification. They considered, as you know, in the natural system a lot of characters: morphological, anatomical, embryological, phytochemical, many characters for their classification. And in phylogenetic system, I have taken one example, that is of John Hutchinson. He was a British botanist associated with the Royal Botanic Gardens, Kew, London. Kew is a very important herbarium in the world. He developed and proposed his system based on Bentham and Hooker's as well as Bessie's dicta. So he has actually taken many characters from these classifications also, natural classification. But what he has added is the phylogenetic aspect, the ancestry of the plants, and he has published his work in the Families of Flowering Plants in 2 volumes from 1954 to 1960. He suggested 2 main taxa of dicotyledons of angiosperms as herbaceous and woody. Hence, we will keep learning about taxonomy in our daily life. In next class, we'll look more into the classification. Till then, keep looking at the plants and keep making a note in your mind about it. Until we meet again. Thank you. Bye-bye.